brother spoke at the last TED. His brother is one of the information architects in the Understanding book, so it's a very special family. He got one of the Chrysler Awards. Look at those shoes, my God. He got one of the Chrysler Awards last year. They didn't give you a car. And we have some terrific furniture, I think chairs and a table and other things that he's giving away as gifts, and we might do that first thing tomorrow morning. Are you going to be here tomorrow? Yes. Let's give it away first thing tomorrow morning, because it's not the right time to do that kind of thing. What was that? You did something behind my back.
No, nothing at all.
Okay. I put him last because of the connection between this and going over to the design center. And that was my somewhat unclever thought, as it turns out. And we are going to go over to the design center, which has an exhibit, and I think probably has some of his things in it, or certainly he's worked with them. So I think enough time has happened. Why don't you launch into your speech?
Am I on?
You're on.
Okay. First thing I want to say is when I got to Toronto this morning, I noticed that there's a plethora of moose all over the city. And I remember a year ago being in Chicago, and there was a myriad of cows all over Chicago, with each artist interpreting cows. I'm involved in a project right now in New York, which we are doing, where there'll be several thousand rats. So besides the manholes that I did for New York City, you'll see a nice rat painted and kind of visually, I'm going to pixelate it or something, or do something interesting with it. I want to say quickly a couple of things. One is that industrial design is probably one of the most misunderstood professions, I think, in the world. And I was on a plane about 1995 or 94 or something. And I'm sitting beside this gentleman who owns 17% of the pharmaceutical company he owns, Prozac. And so he's a wealthy man, obviously. At that time, I was barely surviving in New York, seriously. And I'm sitting beside him, and he said to me, "What do you do?" And I said, "Well, I design products and objects and things." And he said, "Oh, I love products. I have a fetish for objects." And he says, "I buy everything." And he pulls out this kind of emporium catalog that's on the airline and looks through all the objects and says, "I own everything in this catalog." And I realized, speaking of a material culture, there's a lot to think about when the fact that we all collectively touch, on average, 600 things a day, and yet somehow industrial design is a very marginal profession, not known at all. And so then he turned to me and he said to me, now this is 1994 or something, he turned to me and said, "So what are you designing now?" And I said, "I'm designing a garbage can." And he looked at me and didn't speak to me for the rest of the flight. Now, I remember getting off that plane very depressed. A little bit like I am now, because this day was so phenomenal, actually. It was amazing that I started to kind of rethink my profession once again. So I designed a lot of things, but the world is changing right now, and I'm going to really quickly talk about how when I travel the world, I've just noticed that there's this, what I'm going to call the casual engineering of America. And that is that United States is somehow perpetuating a casualness, a lack of class, a kind of, I think Richard says something about using 3 names. Well, when I was really arrogant and very insecure, I had 3 names. I was using 3 names too. I thought that was kind of interesting. And then I dropped it down, got rid of the middle name. Now I'm dropping my last name. Because the real casualness, if you think about, let's talk about the music culture, youth culture, popular culture, it's coming down to a singular name, in a sense, a singular culture. And I think the world is shrinking so quickly and so rapidly that our experiences are becoming, in a sense, identical. And in a sad part, in a way, our experiences are also becoming someone else's experiences. What I mean by that is if you go to dinner and you watch people sitting around dinner and they start talking about films, what they're talking about is not their experiences. Their experiences are watching the films, but their experiences are not what actually took place in the film. So we're becoming a kind of simulation. That's the Baudrillard argument of the simulacra of simulation of the simulation. And so in that regard, I think that when I think about materialism and I think about objects and things around our lives, a segue for a moment, is that the other thing that we're breaking down, because we're going to lose class, is that we're breaking down, I think, what I'm going to call the loss of specialization and the loss of the profession, meaning that we can see a great cross-pollinization, a great kind of cross-fertilization right now of artistic endeavors. And what Douglas Cardinal said about having the power to create this kind of gift is that the gift doesn't have to be paradigmatic, doesn't have to be incisive. It can be extensive. It can be broad. You can do what you want in this day and age, I think. And I am now in my office, I'm doing right now shoes, watches, eyeglasses, high-tech products, a hotel, shops, a restaurant. And it's very, very extensive, because what I realized is that I really want to touch and embrace and be kind of interface our physical world. My processes are very digital, but I really want to shift and change our kind of experiences. And what I realize is we can really change experience and behavior through physical things. So a table is not necessarily a table anymore, but a table is actually a way of meeting or a way of eating or a way of there's a certain behavior, there's a certain sense of pleasure or a certain sense of whatever it is that you can really shape and change about people and behavior. So what I realized about kind of industrial design is that industrial design, its roots are in industry, and it's about the idea of the production of goods, which to me is probably the most fascinating thing in the world, because I think that as technology gets better and better and better, there's going to be a fantastic kind of equilibrium of production, meaning that I won't be halfway around the world and getting things made by hand. I won't be having running shoes made for 50 cents a day in a certain country, but what will end up happening inevitably is that machines will produce all our goods. And the real information age, the information society, is about removing from humanity, from people, this idea of the making on the assembly line. And I'm not talking about craft. Craft is a whole other issue. But I'm talking about this kind of repetitive motion of the making of things, which I think machines are replacing day by day by day. So in a sense of now, it's interesting, because if you think about at one city versus another city across the world, you can have the exact same machine in both places. You can have some incredible multi-turret 4D access machine that could do some incredible work. And one culture, and this kind of goes to some of the discussions today earlier, versus another culture, what's going to kind of differentiate the goods that the machine produces? Well, the only thing that's really going to differentiate the goods, actually, is ideas. And really, what it comes down to, I think technology is getting us to the point where ideas will separate us from, let's say, good and bad, if there is such a thing. You know, I realize that I'm just going to quickly talk about this project here. This project is a reconfigurable kind of device. It's called Cocoon, and it can reconfigure onward and onward and kind of create these coves. And it's also got digital interface in it, and this is a kind of bringing together of the idea of furnishings and the digital age by kind of bringing them close enough together that you can actually, your furniture becomes intelligent or smart. I'm not going to go really into detail about it, but I think that going back to the goods, I want to talk about the idea of two machines. I've never done this before. Usually I control the PowerBook, so I feel awkward. But if you go to, no, quit out. Go to variants, right there. Okay. In 1984, I had the pleasure to have a professor named Gaetano Pesce in Italy when I was doing my master's. And he was very kind of interested and obsessed with this idea of producing non-serialized objects, one-off objects. And he was doing things like, for example, taking a plywood form and pouring into it polyurethane foam so that when it expands, it wouldn't reach all the surfaces of the mold, and in turn you have every chair that comes out of the mold becomes different. It's kind of like it's almost like the idea of craft, that every time something is touched by hand, it becomes its own non-serialized thing. So I started developing this idea with digital technology, which is now it's got to be 15 years later. Actually, I started this about 1996. This idea that if I could develop software program, kind of random programs that would be fed into a Mastercam, into a machine, and in turn the machine would do cutting and lathing and drilling and boring and all these things simultaneously, that I could try to create some sort of random pattern where when it shifts XYZ axis all the time, I could always end up with different objects. And it's a very, very difficult thing to do. Why am I interested in doing this? Well, there's two things. Why is it difficult to do? Because the market and people are not ready, because we are such a modernist society and we believe in this idea of the identical, hence cloning, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that the idea that things become disparate from one another is a very odd idea, especially in the sense of commercial goods. So what I decided is that I'm going to kind of keep pushing this, but there's a good reason I'm pushing this. I'm not the only one who's pushing this. I was in a mall 4 years ago and I saw Levi's developed a pair of jeans with a laser cutter that you could get custom-made jeans to suit every one of us individually. So I realized as human beings, we are all individual organic beings to begin with. And so the differences of us need different physical things in our lives. Really, we don't need any physical things in our lives if we could continue to have our experiences and kind of elevate our experiences, but the physical things hopefully contribute to those. So that means that if I want a bicycle that can be customized to me, it should be customized to me. And eventually what's going to end up happening, I see, is a kind of system out there where we will be able to develop and design our own things for our own lives, our own spaces, and we will be able to even develop our own software, etc., perpetually, very, very simply. And we already see this pattern starting to happen. Now, in a sense of contradictory phenomena, here I am traveling the world and I see everybody wearing sunglasses from the Sunglass Hut and a t-shirt from the Gap and reading the same magazines and onward, onward, onward. All over the world there's this kind of similarity going on. And yet at the same time we have this idea that we can actually artistically express ourselves, be individual, etc., via the internet, technology, and all this. We use something like 4% right now on basis of average of a computer program. It's kind of amazing how the opportunity of customization, of personalization is at our fingertips, and we're not engaging it yet. And I think there's going to be at some point something kind of very interesting that will happen when we can start to configure our lives. When, we've heard of kind of rapid prototyping, stereolithography, all these things where we make models. This is, the term is desktop manufacturing. So instead of sitting at my desk as publishing and I make my own business cards, here I'm sitting at my desk and I'm making my own 3D physical things. If I make my own 3D physical things, which we can do now up to a certain point like this, about this scale, well, I can do that right now for about a $200,000 machine. I'm in Tokyo and I go into a store that sells refrigerators and et cetera, beautiful tech, and I see the same machine reduced down to this small that plugs into my computer that's for desktop manufacturing, that I can actually cut and make my own little Hot Wheels. And it's sold to kids. And it's a $6,000 machine. So it's amazing how fast this technology is moving, where we will be able to actually kind of, in a sense, manifest and physicalize our own surroundings. And I've had students of mine develop software programs that basically, when you get on the internet, you can, for example, a really banal object like a vase, that you can actually, with an XYZ axis, twist and shape the vase the way you want, and it's automatically, digitally, hands-off, robotically cut and sent to you. in 2 weeks. So you've kind of designed, you as artist has designed your own vase. So if we move to the last, I don't know how my time is doing. How's my time doing?
When you're finished, we're going to dinner.
Oh, great. Okay. So, you know, I've said this before, but you know the Buckminster Fuller 17-hour lecture?
Yes.
Were you there, Richard?
I was there for about a 12-hour one at Penn.
Really? Fantastic. So,
That's your threat?
so I'm trying to talk about a lot of ideas kind of very quickly because I always considered myself in a sense a bit of a pluralist, and I don't want to, it's very hard for me to think about when I came here today. I'm going to only talk about one singular idea and only have 20 minutes to speak. But, so I'm going to talk about another aspect of the world and the way the world is changing. And I'm going to call it the information aesthetic, although you can call it the digital aesthetic, et cetera, et cetera. I think that we are starting to shape our world around us via our new tools, via our technology. We are, in a sense, I used a word about 6 years ago, although I just heard that the science fiction writer Sterling just said that he created the word, blobject. But what blobject meant for me when I made that word up was the idea that I had software programs in my office. There was a program called Strata Pro at that time, and it had a feature called Metaball. And Metaball would allow you to kind of almost blobify anything. So you could put 2 cones on the screen and then make them into a kind of amorphous, but beautiful blob. Amazing about that is that the geometry there is completely transferable into realistic toolpath geometry, meaning that we could never do that before. In other words, we could never create these incredibly complex curves and understand them, basically. And now we can understand them like that, which is amazing. Basically, we have mathematical patterns for all of them. So naturally, what ends up happening? We start to see a kind of a blobification of the world, a softening of the world. And this ties in, and this is how I'm going to kind of end my note here, is that here we have, on one hand, this softening of the world, meaning that you noticed our cars, our automobiles are softer. We're starting to see kind of amorphous. We've seen a movement of blob architecture. We've seen movements of this organic language, vernacular that's moving around us. And then as you walk around the world, you're in Paris, and all of a sudden you see the Charles Jourdain are dropped for running shoes. It's now, Paris is becoming a kind of running shoe culture also, is that you start to see that this is about casualness. So the softness / casualness, and I think that that Moishe Southey, I think, spoke about this, about life, just everything becoming larger. If you start to combine all these words together, you start to find out that, well, the softening, which has to do with new computed paradigms, and this casualness of culture, which is really about dropping the tie on Friday, then Thursday, then Wednesday, etc., are coming together. And that the whole world, in a sense, is starting to meet I don't have the word to express it, but it's meeting in a way that all cultures are somehow becoming a kind of freer. There's a new kind of more autonomous way of looking at life. And maybe the casualness or a kind of organic process or organic lineage to go through life is more about this idea of having dreams, doing what you want, moving anywhere without any fear, to actually explore and to artistically pursue what you really want to do has a lot to do, I think, with the syntax of the idea of the casual. So the casual engineering of the world, the way the world is changing, is really about autonomy, in a sense. And the idea that we will be able to configure our physical world with the things that we need or enjoy or bring pleasure to us, regardless of what they are, the way that we can customize our lives will have to do totally with this kind of this uniqueness of this casualization of the world. So this last project, which I'm building for San Francisco MoMA for a show in January called 010101, is an installation that's just about, I think, 8 meters by 8 meters. And what it is a self-skinned, what they call memory foam. And the idea is that it's a landscape of a single apartment for work, live, play, etc., for all these things. But what really this project is about is a digital landscape. The entire surface is soft, and I always thought about, Bucky's great dreams about the Dymaxion house, the idea of dropping houses from helicopters. This, in a way, is the idea of dropping interiors from helicopters, in the sense that this interior is completely configured by you. The real intention of this, actually, this interior, is to be able to be on the internet and you decide what you want in your environment, in your private space, and you configure it. And the system is flexible enough, and there's going to be an animation of how it really works, which I don't have here, is flexible enough that it actually can move and shift, so you decide when you want chaise or bed or digital projection, et cetera, et cetera. And in fact, we're going to try to make a working prototype of this for San Francisco. If Aaron Besky, the curator there, heard my words saying, "We will try too," because he thinks it's being done. The idea would be that you're lying in the space, you have a little slit, you can slip a DVD in, you can see projection come out of one area, you can move the projection in the space, et cetera, et cetera. But really it's about, in a sense, of a kind of doing away with, and this sounds completely hypocritical, a kind of anti-object, anti-kind of space. And it's an experiment, and I'm trying it. Anyway, so I think I'll end right there. Thank you.